The housing crisis in Ireland is worsening. In February 2017, more than 7,000 people were recorded as homeless, including over 2,500 children. More than 100,000 mortgages were in arrears, many of them being families who are now at serious risk of losing their homes. On top of this, we have the hidden homeless, the possibly thousands of people living in overcrowded conditions. At the same time, there are 198,000 empty homes in the country. The government's plan, Rebuilding Ireland, is doing nothing to alleviate the crisis. The plan relies on the private sector to provide social housing, with minimal numbers being constructed by the state. Compare this to the 1940s, when the state built thousands of houses in places like Ballyfermot and Cabra. They were built so that those living in squalor in collapsing tenement buildings could have a safe home. Today, the tenements have been replaced by hotels and hostels, which are just as unsuitable for the people forced to live there. I spoke to Carrie Hennessy and Tom Ryan, two activists who have been staging a sleep out outside the door.
Yeah, I'm homeless since last April, and I was in the hostels for 4 months in Dublin. As somebody that doesn't do drink and drugs, it was horrendous being around drugs constantly. I was only in one of the hostels 5 minutes and 3 girls were smoking heroin in the room. So I've went and talked to a lot of the homeless rough sleepers and asked why are they rough sleeping, and a lot of the reason is because they don't want to go into hostels surrounded by drink and drugs. And there's one hostel in Dublin that you get urine samples when you go in, so there's no drink and drugs in there, but it's one hostel out of a lot of hostels that is drug free, so they need to make more drug free hostels.
Well, we've taken it here simply because Simon Coveney's Rebuild Ireland plan is not working. It's just simply not working. He won't man enough to actually say he doesn't know what he's doing in this job. We have politicians here that are walking past homeless every day of the week and are just not even acknowledging them. So we brought it to the Dáil because that way then they can't just walk past them. They have to stop, because we're going to be here, we're going to be chanting at them, we're going to be talking to them, we'll call them by name, and they have no choice but to stop and actually talk to us then.
Can you just tell me what you would like the government to do?
Well, better resources for hostels, for one. The hostels that are out there at the moment are not good enough. There's hostels there that are absolutely disgraceful. I wouldn't put a dog into them. Some of them are just like an open barn, and it's just not good enough. But also they need to build houses. They need to be building and opening up these boarded up houses. They need to be bringing them back into circulation. The councils need to be building on the land that they owned instead of privatising this. You know, privatising is not what this country should be about.
We're here in the studio, and I have 3 people here with me who have experience in homelessness, either experienced it themselves or have been working with homeless people for a long time. We have Selena Hogan, who is herself on the brink of homelessness. I have Father Peter McVerry, who people know have been campaigning for a long time with homeless people and against homelessness. And then we have Councillor Melissa Halpin here as well from Dún Laoghaire County Council. So Selena, I'll come to you first, and can you just tell me a little bit, you're on the brink of homelessness yourself, so can you tell me about your situation?
Well, at the moment now I've 10 days left. I have 10 days left in my home. I'm to be out on Easter Monday. No arguments no arguments about it. The landlord just wants me out. I've done nothing for the last 5 months. 5 months now of looking everywhere. Dublin City Council failed me. They gave me the wrong information for 5 months, only to tell me 26 days, which would have been 2 weeks ago, that I wasn't their problem. I'm South Dublin City Council's problem. I've had to start for 5 months that was trailing along and everything. I had to start from scratch again with another council in little to no time. It's been very difficult. I find out there now, when you're looking at private properties or looking to rent, soon as they hear the HAP scheme, soon as they hear you're unemployed, straight away stereotype, you're no good. They don't want to know.
And do you feel as well that being a lone parent makes it even more difficult?
Those, once again, it's another stereotype as well. You're a lone parent, you're not working, you're unemployed, you're looking for like rent, rent allowances, HAP schemes and all the rest of it. It's, it's difficult to kind of get around these people that are viewing these homes, and it doesn't make it easier with the amount of people that are viewing these homes because they're in the same situation as myself. It doesn't benefit when you haven't got that you're working, or that you're something going on. The reason I don't work is because I have a special needs son. I have college degrees, I have a leaving cert, I don't do drugs, I don't drink. I've done nothing but done art for my community up over the years, even in Dolphin House. So has my family. And to be treated like this now in society with the way things are going is it's just shocking to think that you're fighting out there, you're trying to get it across that you're a good human being. I mean, how can you prove to an estate agent or a landlord that you're not a bad person, just because you're on welfare or unemployed? Like, how do you actually step up and take that stereotype away from yourself just to get a home? I don't think it's right. I think it's absolutely diabolical, and it's just, people need to stand out more. Like I have now in the last couple of months. I've kind of stepped up now, being a mother on the blink of homelessness with kids, and I've just said no, I've had enough. I'm not putting up with it. I'm not going to no hostel, I'm not going to a B&B. I need a stable home or a stable environment while I'm waiting on a home. I'm not going to it. I'm just not going to a hostel. I'm really not.
Yeah, and Selena, you took part in the documentary on RTE that was aired on Monday night. And do you feel that RTE gave a fair representation of your situation?
I actually don't think they did, as I actually stayed up to watch it myself. I don't think my story was put out there like many of the rest of them. Kind of have to say now, in all fairness, that some of them on the documentary was a bit, their stories were a bit ridiculous. But like that, I wasn't shown upon, I wasn't even mentioned, nor was I invited to the Claiborne live show, while everyone else who participated in that documentary on Monday was there. I did get in touch with RTE about that because I was very highly insulted, to think that I had 12 hours in my home to be seen for 5 seconds, and to be told that the reason I wasn't put out there and my story wasn't made kind of so public was because the estate agent who actually was selling my property threatened RTE, saying that they were slandering his company name by putting it out there that he was basically involved in putting families homeless on the street. So RTE kind of ran scared then, and once again, because of a landlord, you could say, someone above power who thinks they can belittle the small people, went and belittled me, tried to belittle me, because I went out the next day again and did my vigil outside Ballyfermot office, which I'm doing every Tuesday now, from 10 to 12, protesting, not just for my own personal problem, but also for everybody's personal problem within my area, within Dublin, to stand up, let your voice be heard.
And Peter, I'll come to you. You have been involved many years in campaigning and helping homeless people. What do you think has changed over the last few years?
What has changed is the fact that the government delegated responsibility for social housing to the private sector, particularly the private rented sector, and it stopped or it reduced dramatically its build of social housing. In 1975 we built in this country 8,500 social houses. In 1985, when we were in the middle of a recession, we still built 6,900 social houses. In 2015 we built 75 social houses. So it's the lack of social housing that has created the problem. People are being forced into the private rented sector. The private rented sector can't cope, and so people on low incomes, the rents are going up because the demand exceeds supply, and people on low incomes or people who are unemployed are getting squeezed out. They're getting squeezed out with all sorts of, either because they can't pay the rent or because the landlord wants them out and gets somebody else in who can pay a higher rent. Today we have more homeless people in this country than at any time since the famine. And we are the 14th wealthiest country in the world, and we have 83,000 millionaires in Ireland. The economy is not working for some people, and the problem is only going to get worse. There are 50,000 houses or apartments in mortgage arrears of more than 2 years, And unless government policy changes, the majority of those are going to be repossessed. And every house or apartment repossessed is potentially a family plunged into homelessness. So we have a crisis. We've had a crisis for the last 3 or 4 years of homelessness. In my view now, the crisis is out of control. The Minister produced a plan. It was a very detailed plan, a very comprehensive plan. We welcomed the plan at the time. The Minister said, you've got to give this plan time to work. It's been 7 months now since the plan was produced, and there isn't any sign of the problem even stabilising, never mind reducing.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And Melissa, I'll come to you. Just what Peter just said about the numbers of houses that are being built is absolutely shocking, and the fact that the government has a plan but it is simply not working. Do you agree with what Father Peter McVerry has said there?
Yeah, the government's Rebuilding Ireland plan is a total disaster. It's not, as Peter says, it's not even stabilising. You can see the figures of homelessness have gone up each month this year. Within that plan, there's the plan to get people out of hotel accommodation by July, and what do we see last month? The figures actually go up again. It's not working, and I think I can't remember who it is that said the definition of madness is, to keep doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. And they have been doing the same thing since they decided to rely on the private sector to deliver social housing. You cannot do that. The private sector are interested in making profits. They're interested in keeping their own house and making sure that it works for them. They're not interested in providing basic services. So I think in terms of government policy, there's that issue of privatisation, and then the other issue of NAMA and what they have done with NAMA over the years, because that was an absolute wealth of homes for people. At the beginning of the crisis, we had 300,000 empty homes in the country. That could have been part of the solution, and instead that 70 billion of loans that NAMA took on, they sold off to Cerberus, the real estate investment trusts, and a company like Cerberus has made 77 million in profit. They've made 77 million in profit, and they have only paid 2,000 in tax. Now, this is the really rotten core of the housing crisis, and this is where, when housing is used as a commodity and allowed to be used for speculation, you are going to get crises like this. And the people who suffer are people like Celine and all the thousands of people living in hotels, not living in hotels, living in overcrowded situations because they won't go to hotels. I mean, one of the hidden aspects of the housing crisis, I think, is the overcrowding that is happening again and again in all areas of the cities in particular, because when people won't go into emergency accommodation, they go back home to live with their mum, they go and live with a sister. I know of so many people, a woman who's living in a car outside her mum's house while her children live with her mum. This kind of stuff is happening. We are going backwards, not forwards, and it's about calling a halt. And I think bringing the NAMA properties, no more NAMA properties should be sold off, because they're just making vast profits out of it. And the awful thing is that one of the plans that Simon Coveney had was that maybe the real estate investment trusts and the vulture funds would get involved in providing houses privately to tenants. But the real estate investment trusts don't want to do that. They do not want to get involved in government contracts because they feel they might be harder to get out of, or there'd be delays in getting money from the state. So they're not getting involved. So even in their own terms, it's not working. Their own plan of relying on the private sector is not.
And Melissa, as a county councillor, you are probably aware that the local authorities own quite a good bit of land around Dublin, but they're not building, and the councils blame the government for not giving them money to build, and then the government blame the council for not drawing down funds to build. So where does the blame actually lie there?
Yeah, it's a good question, and they're always playing this game. It's their fault, it's our fault. We had an interesting situation where Simon Coveney came into the council, and he, on direct questioning from ourselves in the council, he said, look, money's no object. You won't find me standing in the way if yous have good plans. And the chief executive heard this, and yet they still blame each other. And I think what's behind it is, again, the policy of wanting the private sector to get involved in delivering housing. So you have a site in Dunleary, the Shangana Castle site, which could fit 500, 600 homes, fully owned by the council, and yet they want to go into a public-private partnership because they say, well, it'll allow for a better mix, a social mix, and it'll allow for people to buy houses as well as to rent houses. But actually what it really allows for is for the private developer to get their hands on public land, and I think we should resist that at every move.
Selena, what do you think of the argument about social mix? I know you grew up in a Dolphin House yourself.
I find really with social mix, I mean, look, without even the private property sector or that one, like anyone can private mix even in with social housing, like public housing. I mean, I was raised in Dolphin House. We had, you know, used to play with the children even off Herberton Road that were, you know, foreign people. We used to mind it, like, you know, as 15, when you just wanted a few bob, you know, we'd knock into a lady with a little foreign girl, and we'd look after her and play in the garden with her. And you know, so it's not really just about, like, you know, just private and it's a mix and this, that. You can mix even in public housing. You know, no one is different, you know, and no one should be made out to be different. You know, it's all back against this class business. You're either working class or you're middle class. It's still bringing that whole rich to poor thing. Now it's middle class against working class, because the ones above the middle class are just like, they just don't care, like, you know what I mean? They'd rather see, like, you know, people that have stood together for so long to just deteriorate, really.
And Peter, do you think that there's a stigma, first of all, against, particularly for homeless people, face a certain stigma in society, but also people in council housing?
Well, the stigma is there. The local authorities don't want to go back to the days of building big estates like Tala and Ballymun, and they will say that the social problems that were created by having those large estates was unmanageable. I would argue that it wasn't the concentration of social housing that created the problems. It was a concentration of social housing without adequate services. That's what created Ballymun, when it was built for 16 or 17,000 people, had one swimming pool. You had teenage kids growing up in an area which had one swimming pool. Of course you're going to get problems. There are many local authority estates in Dublin where there are no problems. There are no antisocial problems, or they're perfectly, and people are very happy to live there. So it would be nice if we could have a social mix, but we have a crisis. We have a crisis which is out of control, and we can't afford to be giving land over to private developers.
Thank you so much, all three, for coming and talking to me here today in the studio.